Tensions in South Africa have erupted into a national flashpoint as President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered one of the most explosive and consequential announcements of his presidency. In a nationwide address that was both fiery and unflinchingly direct, the president declared what he called an all-out war on illegal foreigners, framing the moment as a necessary turning point to restore order and defend the sovereignty of the republic. His words, sharpened by frustration and political urgency, sent shockwaves across the country within minutes of the broadcast. The president argued that the nation could no longer bear what he described as the weight of undocumented migration, warning that crime, economic strain, and weakening border systems had left South Africa dangerously exposed. His voice remained cold, steady, and forceful as he insisted that this was not hatred, but law enforcement. Enough is enough, he declared. Either South Africa reclaimed its borders or it would lose control of its future. The speech, delivered from the steps of the historic Union buildings and flanked by senior ministers and security chiefs, immediately ignited a storm of political and public reaction. Citizens, political leaders, activists, international observers, everyone had something to say. As the country braced for a new and uncertain chapter, Ramaphosa announced the deployment of a special national task force that would operate under the Department of Home Affairs with powerful backing from the South African Police Service and the South African National Defence Force. Their mandate was unmistakably aggressive: identify, detain, and deport undocumented migrants with immediate effect. The president insisted that the focus was not on foreigners in general, but specifically on those living in the country unlawfully. He argued that South Africa had become a magnet for undocumented migration due to weak enforcement, corruption at border posts, and years of failing systems. Those who contribute positively and follow the law are welcome, he said. But those who exploit the system, operate underground networks, commit crimes, or maintain illicit businesses would no longer find sanctuary. His supporters responded with thunderous applause, praising what they saw as long overdue strength from a government repeatedly accused of indecision. The speech split the nation with near-surgical precision. In communities most affected by economic hardship, where unemployment is high and crime often feels unrelenting, many residents celebrated the announcement. They argued that the unchecked influx of undocumented migrants had burdened hospitals, schools, and social services, increased competition for scarce jobs, and fueled criminal syndicates. For them, the president's declaration was not xenophobia. It was survival. But opposition leaders, activists, and international human rights organizations condemned the move almost instantly. They accused Ramaphosa of scapegoating vulnerable groups to distract from corruption scandals, stagnant economic growth, and deep internal weaknesses within the ruling party. The Democratic Alliance's John Steenhuisen criticized the speech as a political tactic rather than a genuine solution, calling it desperation dressed as leadership. Instead of reforming the failing economy or rooting out corruption, he said the president was looking for someone else to blame. In sharp contrast, Action SA's Herman Mashaba applauded the president's stance, arguing that South Africans had suffered long enough and that tough action against illegal immigration was not only justified but essential. Within hours, the country saw the immediate and dramatic consequences of the declaration. Reports confirmed massive coordinated raids unfolding in Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. Police officers, Home Affairs officials, and military personnel swept through transport hubs, informal settlements, construction sites, downtown shops, restaurants, and factories. Videos quickly circulated across social media showing officers demanding documentation, detaining groups of people, and escorting them into vans. Some scenes showed bystanders cheering, chanting slogans, and praising the authorities for finally taking action. Others showed shouting matches, residents trying to intervene, and migrants pleading for their rights. In some areas, chaos erupted as crowds surged forward, accusing police of brutality or violating due process. Operation Sovereign Shield, the code name for the nationwide crackdown, reportedly led to hundreds of arrests within the first 24 hours. The Ministry of Home Affairs confirmed that deportations would begin almost immediately, though they emphasized that all legal procedures would be followed. The President's office hinted at sweeping legislative reforms aimed at bolstering border control, tightening visa regulations, and imposing harsh penalties on businesses that employ undocumented workers. Analysts said Ramaphosa's move was the most aggressive and politically risky action of his career. With internal tensions rising inside the ANC, plummeting public trust, and an approaching election season, many believe the president was attempting to reposition himself as a protector of national security and a champion of ordinary citizens. By speaking directly to public frustrations about crime, unemployment, corruption, and failing infrastructure, Ramaphosa appeared to be pushing for a political resurgence. Yet critics warn that such a strategy could unleash dangerous consequences. Xenophobia, once inflamed, rarely burns out quietly. Political analysts argued that the president's approach might have short-term domestic benefits, but would come at the cost of South Africa's international standing. A scholar from Wits University remarked that trying to win votes by targeting migrants was a perilous gamble. This may win support among frustrated citizens, but it destroys South Africa's image as a leading voice on African unity. Xenophobia doesn't leave politics peacefully. Already, neighboring nations had reacted with unease. Governments in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi issued statements urging South Africa to handle the situation with restraint, dignity, and respect for human rights. Zimbabwe's government cautioned that many of its citizens who had crossed into South Africa were fleeing severe economic hardship and not seeking to commit crimes. The region, they warned, depended heavily on cooperation, and harsh measures could fracture long-standing diplomatic ties. International organizations also weighed in. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch condemned the sweeping raids and demanded transparency, humane treatment, and due legal process for all individuals detained. They warned that refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless individuals could be caught in the dragnet facing deportation to dangerous or unstable environments. They urged the South African government to ensure proper screening processes and to avoid criminalizing desperation. Meanwhile, immigration lawyers across the country reported receiving frantic phone calls from families terrified of being separated or deported despite having pending legal applications. On the streets, the emotional temperature reached boiling levels. In neighborhoods like Hillbrow and Alexandra, areas long marked by poverty, overcrowding, and strained infrastructure, residents voiced strong support for the crackdown. They argued that undocumented migrants had taken over buildings, flooded local markets, and worsened crime rates to the point that lifelong residents felt like strangers in their own communities. But many others urged caution. Community leaders and faith-based organizations warned that mass arrests could ignite violence, create tension between locals and foreign nationals, or lead to mob attacks. One Johannesburg shop owner captured the conflicted mood: "We don't hate foreigners, but our country is collapsing. Our people are unemployed. Our government is failing. Something has to change, but we must be careful not to burn down everything." As the nation digested the president's announcement, experts debated whether this marked the beginning of a lasting policy shift or a temporary political maneuver. Some argued that South Africa was entering a new era of hardened border control, strategic policing, and immigration reform. Others feared a descent into deeper social division, government overreach, and potentially violent confrontations. The ANC itself faced growing internal fractures. Some party members praised Ramaphosa for finally taking decisive action, while others accused him of abandoning the party's historic values in favor of populist rhetoric. Rumors circulated about factional battles behind the scenes, with some suggesting that the president's announcement was designed not only to appeal to voters but also to strengthen his position against rivals within the party. International media outlets picked up the story, portraying South Africa as a nation standing at a dangerous crossroads. Analysts questioned whether the crackdown would actually solve core problems such as unemployment, poverty, and crime, or whether it would merely offer temporary political cover. Economists warned that deporting tens of thousands of workers could disrupt industries like agriculture, construction, and hospitality, where undocumented labor plays a significant role. Human rights groups continue to raise alarms about potential abuses, overcrowded detention facilities, and the risk of targeting migrants based on appearance or language rather than legal status. Yet for many South Africans, especially those living in marginalized communities, the president's message resonated deeply. They long felt ignored by political elites, and their daily struggles with crime, housing shortages, and joblessness had built up resentment and anger. The promise of a government that finally listened, finally acted decisively, offered a sense of hope. Whether that hope would translate into meaningful change or become a catalyst for new conflict remained uncertain. As the daylight faded across Johannesburg and Pretoria, the streets buzzed with conversations, arguments, and anxious anticipation. Social media became a battleground of competing narratives, from patriotic celebrations to furious denunciations. In taxi ranks, shopping malls, and crowded neighborhoods, people debated what the future would hold: safety or chaos, stability or upheaval, unity or fracture. The president's declaration had not merely announced a policy, it had set in motion a national reckoning. South Africa now stood at the edge of a volatile chapter, one that could redefine its politics, its identity, and its place on the African continent. The world was watching closely. Neighboring nations braced for possible diplomatic fallout. Journalists and analysts tried to dissect the president's long-term strategy. Human rights groups prepared